Welcome to Conversations with Real People. This episode features Chris, who was a neighbor of mine for more years than I can remember right off. We never had a serious conversation until just now. Turns out we agree on a lot and get pissed off at each other a lot. So it became interesting anyway. So stay tuned for Conversations with Real People featuring Chris. And just a reminder, 2084, The Reawakening, a rather positive novel concerning a future in which an individual finds other individuals and they get together to, let's just say, rearrange a very strict, unforgiving government and turn it into something worthwhile. 2084, The Reawakening, available at Amazon or wherever you like to buy books. Thanks. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Individualists Unite. I'm the Radical Individualist, otherwise known as Chip, and this is another episode of Conversations with Real People. And Chris, will you affirm that you're a real person?
Yeah, sure. My name is Chris Lampkin, and I'm a real person.
Okay, that's good enough for me. Chris was a neighbor, is kind of still a neighbor. He owns the house across the street. But you're moving to Detroit, I guess.
Yeah, I live on the east side of Detroit, in the city limits, in an area called Morningside.
Okay, all right. Mm-hmm. So we have, besides being neighbors, Chris is a teacher. I was a teacher, and I thought that might make for some interesting conversation. So why don't you tell me a little bit about your teaching background, where you've been, what you've done?
Let's see. Started with a ceramics degree in college.
Which degree?
Couldn't get a job with anything. Yeah, ceramics degree.
Ceramics, okay.
If I had been in Detroit, I could have worked at like Periodic Pottery. If I'd have been here, maybe worked for Rookwood. But you know, the college route was the only one. So I fiddled around, taught. Like worked at a grocery store for a while, and went back to school. Got my master's before I even started teaching. So I got my master's in art education. So I was 28 when I did all that, which is a lot later than a lot of people, but I was done with my master's degree. I didn't have to try to do it while I was in school and juggle family. So many people these days, I don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
Especially, and back then it was all physical classes. There was no online anything. So you really would have a hard time getting your master's degree with a family back then. But yeah, so I started taught in Alabama my first year because that's where I went to school. So it's because I met Megan, that's Chris's mom, and we wanted to. She worked at St. Rita School for the Deaf. So I'm like, oh, well, I'm going to try that. I want to work there. So I did. They hired me, and I learned sign language, and I taught there for 7 years. Okay. So in retrospect, I wish I'd never left my first school, because then I would be retiring probably within the next year or maybe the next 3 to 4 years with full benefits. Yeah. And so I kind of messed up in that regard. Right. But, so I worked at St. Rita for 7 years. That was fantastic. That was that was like roughly 4th grade to 12th grade. I taught science there. So, and then the rest of it was all art. And then after that...
Well, art and science, that's an interesting combination.
Yeah.
How did you get into science?
Well, I have a little bit of a science background, but it was really like, it was a deaf school and it was a Catholic school, so they didn't have the same standards. They just had a non-tax certificate, so you didn't have to be certified in science to teach science the way you would in a public school.
Okay. And what kind of science was it?
Just very basic, because mostly with deaf students, a lot of them, their education, a lot of things are just kind of delayed. They're just a little bit behind. So I caught myself. I taught physics, chemistry.
Well, you were into it then.
All of the subjects for sure, but it's extremely difficult to convey concepts when there's no sign for the word, and a lot of people just assume that deaf people can read the way they can, and that's just not. It's like learning to speak or learning to write Chinese without ever having heard it spoken. Extremely difficult. Okay. And so most deaf people can't read. Barely at all. Well, in the regular population, the reading level is what, like 4th grade reading level is the average. So deaf children had a really hard time. So some of the concepts, we did great stuff. We did a lot of hands-on experiments. Things with gravity and the basics, the laws of physics, and that kind of stuff was fun. Yeah, and then I got out of teaching for a while.
Because why?
Just Well, I was at St. Rita and the pay was so stupid low, and for long hours, and I was like, I just don't want to do this anymore. I was burned out, and then just worked a few jobs that didn't require a degree or anything like that. Worked at Starbucks for a while, worked at Planet Fitness for a while, and just unfulfilling.
For my part, I taught only one place for 6 years in the 1970s, and that was in a rural farm community. Me having come from the Boston suburbs, it was different, and I loved it. I'm talking about some realists. I guess when you're a farmer, you better be a realist or you're in trouble. So there's no faking it. So yeah, these were real people, as we are.
In Hillsborough, is that where
Hillsborough.
That's where you used to teach?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I thought you were from there. So you're
No,
from,
no.
What's the name of the town you're from then?
It was Westwood.
Okay, because Anna's from Framingham. I don't know how
Oh, really?
close to Boston you are. Yeah.
Oh, I know Framingham, sure.
Yeah, she grew up in Framingham. Her family still lives there.
Oh, okay.
A small world.
Yeah, yeah.
So then you went to Hillsborough and you taught there.
Yeah, so and I taught earth science. It's kind of interesting because I was teaching.
I love earth
Yeah,
science.
well, yeah. I was teaching it to seventh graders. I'm knowledgeable enough about earth science. I have the physics background, the chemistry.
Yeah.
I was a
You just
licensed
stay one
science.
lesson ahead of the kids. That's all you got to do.
I was a licensed science teacher, but it's funny. I was teaching earth science, and what that included climatology, right?
Mm-hmm. I guess.
It
Yeah.
does.
Was that in the public school?
Yeah, and this was just ahead of Al Gore and his silliness, and I'm sorry if
The
I'm
beginning of that. No, I remember.
Yeah,
I was
and-
young at that time.
Yeah.
I was going to say you were there in the mid '70s. The Al Gore thing that I remember later on, that was into the '80s.
Yeah, it's right around, well, because, I remember it quite well, because back then it was the Ice Age. Never mind the global warming, it was the Ice Age.
Uh-huh.
And every kid would come in early, somebody in every class would come, is it true that we're going to have an Ice Age in 100 years?
Oh, the Ice
Yeah,
Age.
yeah, oh, yeah,
I
because that's
missed
what they
that.
were saying. And
I was younger. Okay,
Yeah.
I was too young for that. I think during that
Oh,
time.
yeah, yeah. And I'll tell them,
72.
we don't know what's gonna happen in 100 years, but an ice age, probably not.
Yeah.
But all these silly predictions and, oh my goodness, and it's just still going on.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah, I'm gonna do a video about that, I swear to God, one of these times, and get into some of the legend and the myth, plus the reality, because I was teaching climate change, so how can they call me a denier when I was
Yeah.
teaching it, you know? But whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're not here to give our personal biographies, but people talk about education, what it was and what it is, and how it got that way. Do you think it's getting better, worse, staying the same?
That's a good question. I would have to say it depends on what your definition of education is.
Well,
Because as education started out, as you know, in America, it was mainly a male profession. It was modeled on the European system, where it was like lecture and that sort of thing, and it kind of switched at some point.
well, if I could jump in, because my impression of all that, and correct me, most people didn't really get an education, average
Oh
folks.
no, yeah.
So the
you're-
well-to-do, the aristocrats, they would have tutors. The tutor
Yeah.
would come to the mansion and tutor
Mhm.
the kids.
Yeah.
And then some of them, and even if you were an aristocrat, you didn't necessarily go to college, but if you did, then you would have been educated at home by tutors, then you could go to college and go from there to learn
Yeah.
philosophy, the law,
Mhm.
medicine. But most people didn't go anything that resembled real school, even as far as elementary school, even rich people.
True, this
didn't,
would have been
you know.
more in the bigger cities, probably.
Yeah,
You would have
yeah.
found it like that, And they copied the European model for a while, but then it became more of an evangelical mission. So women took over the positions. They were willing to work for far less than the men. This is the beginning of the public school system.
Okay. But again,
Yeah.
you say women, but I still.
And even
I just
today-
want to establish, though, besides women, just the idea of an elementary public school is 1800s at the earliest. I don't think 1700s they had anything like that.
Not at all. Not
And
at
it
all.
wasn't commonplace every place in the 1800s. So it was
Mhm.
it's something that's been developing all this time.
Yeah, right. Well, Yeah, but right, because there were no kids to go in school because they were doing manual labor jobs.
Well,
from a
yeah, some
very
of them were,
early age,
this is
yeah.
also the Industrial Revolution, some of
Mhm.
those kids were in a factory, yeah.
And the agricultural revolution,
I was gonna say, if they weren't in the factory, they were working on the farm at home,
if
you
they
know,
were
so.
old enough to work, yeah. And I mean, and that's a tough thing because I think that it's tough that kids have to give up their childhood and start working at such an early age. Sometimes you see those pictures and their faces look so weary.
Yeah, I've read,
You're like, it's sad.
yeah, I've read, where did I read? About one of the books, I'll have to dig that one out. Yeah, I mean, to some extent, people felt that working in a factory was easier than working on a farm, so a lot of people just said, so much for the farm, we'll work at the factory, and that would mean the whole family, but the
And it
whole
was
family.
reliable money too.
Reliable.
If your farm,
heavens,
if
yes.
the drought came, you're
Yeah.
screwed.
Well, yeah, and here's another thing, we're getting a little ways away from the education part, but the idea of a job where you get a paycheck and then you go spend your paycheck on buying stuff, that's kind of a new-ish
Oh, yeah,
idea.
that's
'Cause
like
when the-
with Ford, basically. That's the
Yeah.
the beginning of all that.
Yeah, because you would have a farm, people would farm, sharecrop or whatever, serfs, or whatever terms you want to use.
Yeah.
It was subsistence. They grew their own food, made their own clothes, literally wove their own wool on the loom, made their own clothes, made their own furniture, such as which would be just split logs and stuff, not furniture like
Yeah.
we think of it now. And maybe you could sell some eggs or something for a few bucks and be able to buy something. But the idea of a paycheck didn't hardly exist until later in the
The Industrial
1800s.
Revolution, yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, you can't have people working in a factory till there's factories, and they
Yeah.
didn't really start until the very late 1700s, so.
Yeah.
So, so anyway, yeah, we're talking about all this public school stuff, and but interestingly enough, and ironically enough, I guess, I think factories largely financed public schools.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
once
tax
once
base
there
is
was
true.
that level of productivity, you could afford to build a building and hire teachers, so, you know,
Yeah.
so.
And I wonder, I really, like you said, is education improving? I would have to say that I think what is happening is so incremental that it is hard to see.
Well, and it would be, I mean, you can expect lightning strikes on education to change things in a big way.
Well, a lot of the burden too in America on the educational system is just it has to solve a lot of the problems of the past, you know? Like, for example, people always, you're going to give people a hard time because of their background. Like, for example, a lot of people don't want to work in urban schools because of the black population. They say they're too wild, I can't deal with it, it's too ridiculous, whatever. But the roots of that problem were laid long before, and now it's sort of our responsibility to have to pick it up.
Okay, well, it'd be more.
Just in the fact that, like, for example, if it's illegal for you to read, then how are you going to turn around and be like, in 60 years, how are you going to be like, okay, catch up really quickly?
Yeah,
you can't do that. So you have to be like, all right, so here we are. We're trying to do these things. There's a lot of, things that are built into the system that we can't control,
Nobody.
And we have to try to mitigate, and we have to try to change it.
Yeah.
We have to do something.
Yeah, because we say we can't control. I like to think nobody controls too much, because that's what you call a tyrant. That's
Life
the person
happens.
That can,
Yeah.
yeah.
Life is what happens when you're making other plans.
Yeah. But
So yeah, is education? I think the goal of education these days, unfortunately or fortunately, it's not just to teach you 2 + 2. It's to teach you how to take care of yourself. That this kind of behavior is not acceptable in a social situation.
But do you think it works? And the reason I say that is, I'm the radical individualist. I'm not I'm certainly not a socialist. I'm not anti-socialist either. But I don't think socialism can solve the things that it's trying to solve. The way for a child to be all the things I guess we'd say we'd like for a child to be is to have parents raise them that way. I don't think okay, there's the community, and I grew up in a community, a perfectly good community. The people who really influenced me was my parents, and I think the neighbors that were around. There were 2 or 3 neighbors that I was close enough to that they had some influence on me, and there were the other neighbors that didn't make that much difference. I'm thinking, and I went to school and I had teachers, and I'm just thinking out loud here. I don't know if let's say my parents had done a terrible job of raising me, and of course they did a great job.
Like you had friends that are like their parents probably just didn't do a very good job. You knew people you grew up with, the parents weren't the best.
Well, I didn't. No, I'd say
You didn't?
No, I grew up in a nice suburb. And,
But sometimes, you know, the parents can be whatever, or just not
Well,
there,
sure,
or
sure.
like full or whatever, and
Yeah.
you look back and see how maybe they didn't quite make it.
Yeah.
You know.
So, then I'm saying, okay, so if you have 2 good parents, you're likely to end up being a good kid. If you have horrible parents, you're likely to be a horrible kid. I think that's something to start with, because that's probably true generally.
Yeah.
So what do schools do about that, though? Can the schools just, oh, you grew up with horrible parents, we'll fix that for you? Can we do it?
Well, I think that a lot of it is, can you? You can make incremental changes. Can you fix it? No, but you can at least plant the seeds of what is appropriate and what's not appropriate. A lot of times, like, I would have kids that would come in and they would run across the desks in kindergarten. And I told you, I taught in the suburbs before, so I mean, this was all new behavior to me. I'd never seen this before. And I, you know, and taught them at home not to do that.
Yeah.
But by the end of 1st grade, they knew not to run the desk.
Okay.
I mean, so that's what I mean about incremental changes.
Yeah, okay.
And unfortunately, we want everybody to have like all the right tools in their toolbox, and damn it, they just don't. And then if they don't, what's the opportunity to lock them up?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, is that what you want to do? You want to build a mega prisons and just lock people up, say, fuck you, you can't hang, like you're out of here. And I mean, that is what a lot of people want. You know, and I'm not one of those people. I'm like, you've got to keep at it. You've got to keep educating.
No, I think most people, and certainly myself, I'm not a vengeful kind of person. If somebody robs the liquor store or some such, yeah, I think he has a price to pay. But if in prison he can be rehabilitated, fine. Let him
Yeah.
serve a decent amount of time, let him out early, but only if it is pretty abundantly clear. He's not going to be robbing any more stores or anything, you know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like, how do you stop that? You don't want to wait till you're at that point where you're having to deal with it at that level. So I
The
think
way to start is when they're a baby. That's when you start. By the time they're 12 and now you're going to start,
yeah,
I don't know.
But if their parents are messing up and they're just completely ridiculous at home, and you're with them every day from 5 years old on, well, why not help them out?
Well,
That's kind of what I mean.
Yeah,
So, like,
yeah.
does school have
No,
to
no,
be
no,
a
don't get me
full-time
wrong.
scope
Of
thing?
course, that's what you want to do. It's
But
what
no, I just mean, like, as a full scope, do we want people like school is for learning about science, and then people like me would be like, school's about learning whatever they need to learn to catch up, you know. And sometimes for some people, that's learning, hey, don't punch people when you get
Well,
upset.
let me give you this perspective, because mine's a little unique. I think fairly unique, and it might, you know, reflect off of yours one way or another. But I was in this little school where I had all the kids. I didn't have the black kids or the white kids or the kids from this side of town or that side of
Yeah.
town.
They were all in the
I
same
had
room.
the kids, and
Yeah.
they were all in the same classrooms, sorted out alphabetically. You know, not any other way but alphabetical. So I had in a classroom. 6 sections a day. I had each classroom,
lot.
rich kids, poor kids, black kids, white kids. And so my perspective as a teacher, and I think back, and I thought it at the time. Yeah, I was there to teach science, I taught science, and I was there to be a positive influence, and I think I was.
Yeah.
But I didn't, I influenced every kid there, I guess, hopefully positively. I influenced them, but I didn't change anybody. So the good students kept on being good students, of course. The bad students kept on being bad students. Maybe I helped a little, you know, move them along a bit, got something into their heads. The medium students were medium students, you know.
Yeah.
They came in that way, they went out that way, and I look back, I say, okay, what could I have really changed? And I don't know, what?
I like to think, like, if you worked in a factory and you made a car, at the end of the day, the car is sitting out in the parking lot. You could look at it and you can take pride in your work, and it's perfect. It's how you made it.
Yeah.
It's not easy to do that with kids. And you never know what
Yeah.
you said that's
Yeah.
going to impact their life 20 years from now,
Yeah.
because you're not around to see it. And so that's
Well, and I
my
always thought
perspective.
too, you know, and I still think about some of those kids, where are they now,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. And did
yeah.
one little thing you say, or did you just being a role model to them make a difference in their life?
Mm-hmm.
When they're real messed up and they're at rock bottom, so they'd be like, you know, we used to make fun of my teacher, but actually he was pretty cool. You know,
Oh, yeah.
and they'd be like, what was cool about him? And then they'd be like, maybe I can incorporate some more of that in my life. So I wonder how much impact we really do have.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
especially somebody like you know, you go in, you do a good job, you're doing a good job with your family. I mean, you're a great woodworker and you're a meticulous person, you know. That kind of stuff rubs off
Yeah.
on people. And just being there for them, maybe
I just
when their
wanna-
parents weren't.
But then people are wondering what we're doing down here. Toby's
Oh.
down here.
Yeah.
We're not even. But anyway,
The family dog.
yeah. So, I'm sorry, I interrupted you, but.
No, that's okay. So yeah, so the scope of education has clearly gotten much bigger. Because as you know, the role of education has gone from private to public, you know?
Well, a long time ago.
Yeah, a long time ago,
Yeah.
yeah. And very much to the point now to where it's, you know, there are people who are wanting to abolish the Board of Education. And I think all that would do is you're gonna have to fire them from the Board of Education and rehire them as the Board of Prisons. There's
Well,
gonna have to be.
You mean get rid of the Board of Education? How?
Yeah,
Who?
Betsy
What?
DeVos, that's her whole thing. She wants to abolish the whole Board of Education. She wants to take.
Oh, no,
the federal government
Federal,
out of the
federal.
role.
Well, frankly, I'm not necessarily opposed to that.
Mhm.
I think that, to know me.
Well, have you, let me just say this. I'm from Alabama, and I don't trust Alabama to handle their own education.
Okay.
They are
See,
at their
fu-
dead ass bottom, and they have been down there forever, and the
Okay.
federal government is not even helping them. That means they're not even trying. I just don't know what to do.
What-
I lived there, dude. I'm
Okay,
telling you.
okay. Well, let me give you some of my background, then we can discuss that, because
Yeah.
I'm not certainly saying, well, you're wrong. But I've watched, because the Department of Education, the Federal Department of Education, as we now know, was started by Jimmy Carter in the 70s, I guess.
Mhm. It was a cabinet position. He
Yeah, it became a
established
cabinet position,
Mhm.
so it really started becoming part of the organization of the federal government.
Yeah.
Here I am, even then, I didn't call myself that, but I was the individualist. I was teaching. Jimmy Carter's just formed the Department of Education, and I'm going, oh crap. So
Yeah, see, I'm
different,
too young
different
for this.
perspective, different
I was born in
perspective.
'72, so
Yeah.
I remember Jimmy Carter, but just barely.
Yeah,
All I
yeah.
remember watching on TV is the Iran hostage situation.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
But I have never thought what the solution to anything is more federal government. So, and I still don't think the federal government has really accomplished squat for all the effort that's put into it. It's just
Yeah.
bureaucratized things. It does great at bureaucracy. If you need more bureaucracy, federal government the whole way. But when you try to personalize, you're talking about you and students and me and other students. And I'm thinking federal bureaucracy in Washington, that's a disconnect for me, you know?
Yeah, but it's interesting too because you're from Massachusetts. This is an attitude I normally am very familiar with in the South. The problem, and I think the reason, so you may agree or disagree, but the big reason that the feds, the whole, people deny the impact of the Civil War. Not only the impact and the implications, but the ongoing implications that are still evident today.
Like,
In the way that there is the way the French resistance worked against the existing government when they took over, I feel like Southerners have never really truly assimilated. Into
yeah,
the
they
country.
still, what's the term?
Into the country. They are still conscious objectors.
Yeah,
of
okay,
what-
okay, I wasn't,
conscientious objectors.
I wasn't seeing where
So,
you- yeah.
and so what happened after the Civil War is they came in hardcore because they had to, but then there was so much pushback from Southerners that they really just sort of eased off, you know, with the federal presence, you know. And so ever since then, there has been this big, like, the feds are bad because in a way they're an occupying government.
Well, okay, I'm gonna just give some perspective there, not disagree with you, because you're right.
Yeah,
but,
but that just counts for
yeah,
like Southern.
yeah,
That's my
yeah.
own experience with
No,
Southern.
no, I get
know.
you. But, yeah, because there was Reconstruction,
which is bullshit to them. They hated it all.
Oh, I
They
get
hate-
that.
They
I
hated
get
the
that.
civil
And
rights.
I've read a
they
number-
hate everything.
I've read a number of books by the people, because, yeah, it's one thing to read a history book, it's another thing to read the book by the people at the time, their own experiences with it and thoughts.
Well, they hate carpetbaggers too. You don't even have to be a Fed. You just have to be a business owner from the north.
Yeah, I
They
get
hate
it,
you.
I get it, I get it.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But,
so anyway, so I guess getting back to my point about
Yeah.
the federal government is, it's almost like if you want it to stay a cohesive country, the federal government has to be in some places, because left to their own
Well,
devices.
okay, again, let me give you my perspective. We are really kind of the American European Union in theory. We're supposed to be 50 individual states. That's why it's called the United States with a plural.
I see what you mean.
Yeah.
There's no way you could unite
Yeah,
50
and-
states to do. It'd be like herding cats.
You got it, exactly like herding
Yeah,
cats.
there's no way.
And I've read, again, it's.
If we were all just on an even daytime, if it was just like we were all like trying to get something without any overarching government, it would be virtually impossible to agree. And next thing you know, we look just like Europe.
What's wrong with
Okay.
Europe? And okay, so a lot
Oh,
wrong,
no, no,
wrong,
nothing's
wrong
wrong
with
with
Europe.
Europe, but what I'm saying
yeah.
is what looks to like Europe is you got to go through a checkpoint to get from Georgia to Alabama, for God's sake.
Yeah, yeah.
You know?
Well, you don't because of the European Union.
But unless you go back to England.
Yeah, well, I've been there. I get my daughter.
Yeah,
visited.
yeah,
so
you
yeah,
gotta
I've been through what you're talking
Even
about.
going
Yeah,
from Ireland
yeah.
to
There's
Scotland, you
there's
have
a
to go.
line at the airport. There's the line for the European Union members, and it's like, pshoo, and there's the line for the people who aren't European unions. Wait here, we'll get to you. Yeah,
I
yeah,
walked
yeah,
past a
yeah.
checkpoint from Portugal to Spain that used to be a real checkpoint. Now it's just a bridge.
Yeah,
But it
yeah.
still had all the towers and everything all around.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
But anyway, what my point is though, yeah, there's just like Italy is Italy and France is France, and France doesn't tell anything about how it's going to be done in Italy and vice versa, and Germany and so forth. I get what you're saying about Alabama, and we need to discuss that. But the point is, Alabama is Alabama. It's not Massachusetts. It's not Ohio, and Ohio isn't Idaho, and it isn't California. They each have their own governments. That's the way it's set up to be.
yeah.
Those
sure.
governments, those state governments are supposed to be the ultimate authority within the state. I mean, that's how it was all set up in the Constitution. And I've said this in any number of places, so maybe you haven't heard it from
Then
me.
some of them pushed it too far. Next thing you know, you're like,
Yeah.
hey, can,
Well,
you, can you
but-
cut out holding people
Yeah.
as literal slaves? You know, and
Yeah,
they're
but-
like, no, we can't. So then what do you do?
Yeah. But you talk about this federal bureaucracy in whatever its intentions are, but what it makes is it makes the federal government the boss of things that wasn't even supposed to be part of, including education, healthcare. Well, we need healthcare. Yeah, we need healthcare. Does the federal government need to be in charge of it? And being in charge of it hasn't improved anything. And number one, no, it has no right to be in charge of healthcare or education. But number two, if it was doing it so well, I would have to say, well, gee, they're not supposed to be doing that, but they're doing it so well, I'll take it. I don't think they're doing it so well.
Yeah, right.
I
understand
went,
what you're
okay,
saying.
let me give you an old man's perspective. You talk about the Department of Education started by Carter in the 70s. Well, I went to school in the 50s and 60s. There was no Department of Education.
Well, stay tuned. This is where it really starts getting interesting as Chris and I try to sort through our common experiences, yet our different conclusions and perspectives. Stay tuned for episode 2, Conversations with Real People featuring Chris.